And to that I say amen. I shared in the first service, I was on the road and got the opportunity to listen to our vice president address the graduates at Annapolis, the Naval Academy, as they're launching out as officers. And what I was really struck with is thinking about what those young men are actually volunteering for and the commitment and the sacrifice they're willing to make for us. And I say, God bless them and amen. So, well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. And I'm excited to be with you for a couple of weeks. Many of you know that I travel back and forth in my work between here and Indianapolis, and our office complex is in something called the Pyramids in Indianapolis. They're kind of a landmark. They're shaped by pyramids, but in that office complex are two schools. There's a culinary institute, and then there's an art institute. So there's all kinds of kids roaming around that complex on any given day. And one day not too long ago, I was walking out of the building, and as I was walking out of the building, there was this young man who was walking toward the building. And he couldn't have been more than 22, 23 years old. He had a scraggly beard. His hair looked like it had gotten caught in the blender when he made his smoothie that morning. He had pants that were kind of hanging down over his hips. And as he came toward me, he was kind of bent over. He looked literally like he was 90 years old. And he's just like shuffling like this. He's got a backpack kind of hanging over his shoulder. And he's just shuffling. So I bit. I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And here was his response. He just kind of looked up and he said, "I'm just trying to make it to the end of the day." I thought to myself, wow, talk about setting a low bar. I mean, think about this. If you only meet 70% of your goal, and that's your goal, about 7:45 this evening, it's over. There's no tomorrow. You actually can't set a lower goal, a lower bar than, I'm just trying to make it to the end of the day. And yet it illustrates what seems to be true for many, many of us, that we're shuffling through out of energy, out of enthusiasm, aimless, no goals. And what my friend at the Pyramids illustrates is what I think may be the biggest mistake that we make in life. And that is, we forget to live until we die. We forget to live until we die. So let me, for context, we're going to read about one of my favorite Bible characters. His name's Caleb. You'll find part of his story, because his story travels over many years, but part of his story is found in the 14th chapter of Joshua, beginning reading at verse 6. And obviously you'll see the words on the screen if you don't have your Bibles handy. Now, the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old, and I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. Then the land had rest from war. And Caleb is really the example of someone who understands the principle of living until you die. And to give you a little context for the story, so when the Israelites came out of Egypt, God's actual intention was not to hang around for 40 years. God's actual, his intention, his game plan was, let's get you out of Egypt, let's get the Egyptians behind you, and let's get you into the promised land and start living in the ways that I have for you and the blessings that I have for you. And so they had crossed the Red Sea. They were approaching the promised land. They thought it would be good to spy out the land. And so they sent spies into the promised land from each of the tribes. And among those spies were Caleb and Joshua. And so they went in, they saw how great the land was. They actually brought back big samples of fruit and how wonderful it was. And then when they were given the report, all the other spies started casting fear among the people, that it was a fortified cities, it was going to be terrible, and we're going to be ruined. And Caleb spoke up and said, no. It's a wonderful land, and it's going to be blessed. Let's go and take it. But the other spies won the people over. And they started grumbling and moaning and complaining to the point that God just got really ticked off. He really did. He got so ticked off that he said, okay, if that's how you're going to be, here's what's going to happen. Not a single adult here that's 20 years of age or over is ever going to step foot and see that promised land, with the exception of two people, Joshua and Caleb. The rest of you, you're wandering for 40 years. And that's why they wandered for 40 years, until that generation was literally passed away. And so now we find ourselves in the promised land, and we find our friend Caleb, now 85 years old, teaching us the lesson that I hope we learn today. That the biggest mistake many of us make is we forget to live until we die. So, what's the cause, first of all? Well, I believe the cause has a number of components to it. So, component number one is living in the rut of my comfort zone. And the reality is, we are all creatures of comfort. We naturally strive for what makes us feel good, what makes us happy, what makes us comfortable. We're not, by nature, looking for things that challenge us, looking for things that might be painful, looking for things that are going to force us to grow. Because all of that is hard, it takes effort, it takes work, and we're all about the path of least resistance. And it lands us in something called our comfort zone. It's one of the most powerful forces in your life. And the reality is, we are habitual people. And all of those habits tend to reside in this thing called our comfort zone. I could illustrate it to you this way. Now, if you are a first-time visitor here, this won't work. But if you're a fairly regular attendee of this church, what I want you to do right now is just take a look at where you're sitting. Now, we're laughing because the reality is that you're either within 3 or 4 seats of where you are every week, or you're in the exact same seat. You own it. You claim it. No one takes that seat, right? And the reality is there's like 600 or 700 people that go to this church. But for many of us, we only recognize about 8 or 9. It's the same 8 or 9 that sit in the same area that we do, right? And if you, like next week, just sat on the complete opposite end of the church, it would probably freak you out. You wouldn't know what to do, right? Because we are creatures of habit, and those habits make up this pattern called our comfort zone. The crazy thing about it is that comfort zone we stay in even when it makes no sense, even when it's not effective. So life changes and we really need to step out of that comfort zone and adjust. Instead of doing that, it's much easier to stay in the comfort zone. Why? Well, because it's comfortable, feels good. I don't have to make any extra effort. And what happens is that just contributes to us going into cruise control, just marking time, just passing through. And so if you look at the Israelites, so as they were groaning and complaining, and you find this story in Numbers, but as they're groaning and complaining about where they are now, what they told Moses was, why did you even take us out of Egypt? Why couldn't have you just left us there? Now think about that. There was slavery, 400 years of bondage that they were being released from, but it was so much their comfort zone that they would rather just sit there and wallow in their slavery instead of looking at what God may have had for them. And the rut of my comfort zone is a huge contributor to me forgetting to live until I die. So how many of you like wedge salads? Or does everyone know wedge salads? Yes? Okay. So whenever I go to a restaurant and I'm perusing the menu, wedge salad is always like, it's in the possibility choice because I love wedge salads. So, but I started thinking and discovered something about wedge salads. So first of all, what's in a wedge salad? You've got lettuce, a big chunk of lettuce, right? And then maybe some crumbled eggs, and some blue cheese crumbles, some tomato, some bacon bits, and dressing. Okay? So I started thinking about that, and on that same menu will be dinner salad or tossed salad. And in that dinner salad is lettuce, tomatoes, sometimes some crumbled egg and some bacon bits, and dressing. Okay? Now, the tossed salad or dinner salad is $4.99. The wedge salad is $9. Okay? Now, really, the only difference between the two is the dinner salad, someone did all the work, chopped it up, and made it edible for me. On a wedge salad, I've got to do all the work, all the labor. It's a big chunk that I have to toss. And they charge me $4 more for doing all of the labor. And I think they do it because they always get me with, it's the classic wedge salad, or it's Canadian iceberg wedge salad. It's lettuce, for crying out loud. But now here's the crazy thing. I know all of that. I go for the wedge salad. And that's what we do. We just get in the comfort zone. Okay? So that's cause number one. Cause number two is that we are living in the results of our circumstances. I live in the results of my circumstances. So the reality is our circumstances really pile up in life. And as we are confronted with one circumstance after another, the thing and the conclusion that I think we come to is that life just isn't fair. And the weight of those circumstances begins to wear me out. And as soon as I work my way through one circumstance, 3 more have confronted me. And I think sometimes we just get to the point where we throw up our hands and just give up. It would just be easier to shuffle my way through life and just try to make it to the end of the day. And, life isn't fair, and circumstances do pile up. So look at Caleb in this story. So he did all the right things. He did exactly what God wanted him to do, followed him wholeheartedly. But you know what? He still had to wander for 40 years. That wasn't fair. And the reality is the circumstances of life aren't fair. And they weigh us down, and they get heavy, and they make it real easy to forget to live until we die. So, do you ever have this feeling? Like, are there things that happen in your life that, as you think about it, no matter what you do, it's just going to be a mess, and it's just going to keep getting worse? Okay? So I was thinking about that, and there are a couple of things that I started thinking about where no matter what I do, it starts out bad and it gets worse. Okay? So the first one is when my wife happens to get her hair done and I don't like it. Okay? So the first mistake that I make is, well, I don't like this, so I'm just going to kind of ignore it. Pretend that I don't notice. Well, that doesn't work because I eventually get a stare down and, Michael, did you not notice that I got my hair done? Oh, yeah. The next mistake is worse because then I get asked, well, what do you think? And what I'm thinking is, what, did they use like hedge trimmers? But what I say is, it looks, and then here's the mistake. It really looks, and then I pause. When you pause there, that's the wrong time to pause. It looks, and then the worst word is fine. Not good. Disaster. Okay? Every step along the way just digs me deeper. The other one's even worse. The other one is when your wife says to you, honey, does this dress make me look fat? Now, there are actually only two possibilities here, right? Okay? Possibility number one is, no, it looks great. So you know what you say? No, honey, it looks great. And then she says, oh, you're just saying that, stomps into the closet and changes. And now she's mad at you. Okay? The other possibility is it doesn't necessarily look so flattering today. On that one, first of all, now look, I can't lie, correct? So the answer that I give on that one is, no, it looks great. Now, that answer is based on research. So I read a statistic that says women who carry a little bit extra weight actually live longer than men who mention it. So, and by the way, honey, that outfit looks great. I think we need to pray or something. The circumstances pile up, and they can get heavy. And the reality is, those circumstances can lead us to the place that we forget to live until we die. Third cause is this. I'm living in the reservation of my failures. So here's the reality. Life consists of a connection of failure to failure in some cases, doesn't it? So all of us have experienced it. I don't know anyone that considers failure a positive experience. It feels bad. It hurts. Sometimes it hurts deeply. But the reality is, if you aren't failing at something, you're probably not living. You're right in the rut, okay? Because it's just part of the human experience. But here's what happens. Because it's painful, and I don't like that feeling, as I look to what lies ahead, the fear of failure becomes a huge issue. Because my logical brain says, you know what? The last time I tried this, I failed, and it felt like this, and it hurt. If I try this again, that could happen again. And I don't want to feel that feeling again. So I think what I'll do instead of trying is just get in this rut called my comfort zone and just mark time and do nothing. And, you know, when you look at the Israelites, when they were grumbling and they were complaining, what they were scared of is it wasn't just walk into the land and say, I'll take that house and I'll take that house. There were enemies to drive out, and there were fortified cities. Now, but think about this for a second. So think about where they've come. They've made their way out of Egypt. They were followed by the Egyptian armies. They got to witness the Red Sea being parted, where they could pass through on dry ground, and then the whole Egyptian army, most powerful army of the day, was just obliterated. And now here they are facing a new challenge, and that fear of failure is stopping them from moving forward, trying something great, receiving God's blessings and what He wants for them. And this living in the reservation of I might fail is a powerful, powerful force in our lives. I live in the rut of my comfort zone. I live in the result of my circumstances. And I live in the reservations of my failures. And just come to the conclusion, you know what? It just might be a little bit easier to just mark time and not live until I die. Just make it to the end of the day. That's the cause. So let's look at the cure, because the cure is important. So the cure is really a twofold thing. The first part of the cure is I need to find new purpose. I need to find new purpose. Because when I have purpose, when I have a why, when I have a reason, that creates focus in my life. That creates energy. That creates something to shoot for. That energizes what's just lying dormant. So I had this experience at the beginning of the year. I was changing clothes, and as I was changing clothes, out of my peripheral vision, I could see in my mirror that there was a stranger in my apartment. That wasn't good. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the stranger was actually me. And I didn't like what I saw. It was scary looking. And so I decided, I've got to do something about this. And so I changed my diet and started eating stuff like broccoli and all that good stuff, and started working out, found a gym, and started consistently working out. And 3.5 months later, I'm proud to tell you that there are 25 less pounds of me to love than there were that day. Absolutely, thank you. Well, what changed? I found purpose. I found a reason. I found a why. I found something that I wanted to get accomplished. And the reality is, finding new purpose is the first part of the cure. But here's what happens, I believe, in our lives. The statistics tell us that somewhere around 80% of Americans go to jobs every day that they hate or don't like. Hard to find purpose there when I hate it and don't like it. And I mean, the reality is, if I sleep 8 or 9 hours a day, and if I work at a job that I hate 50 or 60 hours a week, that doesn't leave a lot of time to do things with purpose in my life. It makes it really easy to get caught up in all the causes instead of looking at the cure. And the reality is, what we're confusing is we confuse who I am and with what I do. And we think that what I do is who I am, and what I do isn't who I am at all. I learned this lesson actually early on in the career that I have. My first mentor was a man by the name of Vinny. And Vinny was the poster child for a New York Italian. I mean, he looked like mafia all the way. He always wore a three-piece suit. He smoked a cigar. He talked with a thick New York accent. And he kissed you when he greeted you. And people would always ask me, did you kiss him back? I said, you better believe it. But Vinny had me do an assignment. And the assignment was to write an essay entitled, Who Am I? So I worked on the essay, wrote a good, nice one-page essay. I handed it in to him. He looked at it, he read it, set it on the table in front of me, and said, Mike, that's not what I asked you to do. I said, what are you talking about? I wrote this and this. And he said, no, what you just did right there is you told me what you do. I asked you who you are. Where does your heart beat? What are your passions? What really matters? What are you great at? Where does your purpose in life lie? And I realized, you know what? We do that. And so I want to share with you a story with someone named Ted. Okay? So think about this. Caleb is now 85 years old. Okay? He's really living at a time when it would make sense to just shuffle through. But that's not what happens. Because God lets Caleb know, you know what? I know you're 85. I know a lot's happened. I know it wasn't fair for you to wander around there for 40 years. But I've got a new city for you to conquer. And you see, when you have purpose and you understand what that purpose is, there's a city for it that God has for us to conquer. And so Ted Qualley, most of us would never have heard of him. He has worked for 45 years for a school system as a janitor. And Ted Qualley was nominated as the Cintas National Janitor of the Year. Now, I didn't know there was such thing as this, but apparently there is. Now, don't go and vote. He already won by a landslide. Here's why. He knows the difference between who I am and what I do. And the reality is, he isn't a janitor. That's the playground that he gets to live out his purpose in. His purpose is making a difference in people's lives. And when you find purpose, that makes all the difference. So the first part of the cure is I need to find new purpose. The second goes hand in hand with it, and that is I need to find new passion. I need enthusiasm and energy and excitement about what I do so that I can pour myself into it. And when I find purpose and I find focus and I find a meaning and I find the why, the passion part just falls into place because I'm excited about the opportunity. I'm excited about where life's taking me. I'm excited at what God might have for me instead of just shuffling through. As you read the scripture, Caleb said, look, I'm 85 years old, but I want to tell you, I'm just as rip-roaring and ready to go as I was 45 years ago, and I don't care that those are fortified cities. Turn me loose, let's go. I'm going at it with passion. And that's what God wants for us. You might not get it all right, but do it with passion and do it with purpose. I love this quote. There are two truly great days in a person's life. The first is the day that they're born. The second is the day they discover why. Purpose, passion are the cure. So let me tell you about my friend Cliff as we bring this to a close. So Cliff and I ran around as teenagers, young adults, and we were great friends, and I was friends with his family. And then Cliff gave his life to Christ. Well, I wasn't anywhere near there in my life at that time, and so our lives kind of parted and went different ways. And when I was searching, I called Cliff. And I asked him because I knew he was a Christian, I asked him if I could go to church with him. And after he got up off the floor, he said, well, yeah. And Cliff kind of became my first spiritual coach or mentor. He was the one who cared about me and asked how I was doing, and we started hanging out again. And then our lives went in different directions. And eventually Cliff was called to ministry, went off to Bible college, and had been a youth pastor, was pastoring a church. I had been a pastor for 10 years. My life took some turns, and so I left the active pastoral ministry. And I happened to be where Cliff was pastoring, and so I sat down with him, and Cliff told me, Mike, something's happened, and I'm going to have to resign from the pastorate. And I was like, well, what's going on, Cliff? And he's like, I can't really talk about it just now, but I'm going to have to do something different. Well, I was thinking the worst, and actually it was worse than the worst, because as the news came out, what had happened was Cliff had been on a work and witness trip to either Haiti or the Dominican Republic. They were doing some construction work, and he cut his hand pretty severely. But he had kind of wrapped it up and was working with it, and they were in town helping poor people in kind of the city square. And Cliff saw an elderly man who had kind of fallen over and, was kind of leaning to the side. And so Cliff went over to help him, and he reached around and helped the man up. And as he did, there was blood all over his arm, and he's like, oh, I can't believe it. My hand came open, and I'm getting it all over this guy. And he's kind of wiping it, and come to find it wasn't Cliff's blood at all. It was the man's. And he was in the final stages of dying of AIDS. And the diagnosis it created for Cliff was the same. And it was at a time when that truly was a death sentence. And because of the rigors of pastoring and all of that, Cliff had to resign. He moved back home to Florida where his family was so that he could be close to them. And if there ever was a person who had a reason to just mark time, would have been Cliff. But he didn't do that. Instead, he loved music, so he played the guitar. One time I remember he got the idea that we could sing together in church, and so we started practicing, and he heard me sing. He said, Mike, if I let you sing, people are going to backslide. But he loved it. And so he grabbed a bucket of chicken and took his guitar into a park where homeless people hung out. He sat down and started playing music and feeding them lunch. And that evolved into a ministry to the homeless where he was. And as he was able, he went to different churches and spoke. And he was going through a time where he was among the very first experimental people that they tried all of these cocktails to try to deal with the epidemic of AIDS. And I remember him laying all the medications he had to take across the altar when he spoke. And it was just unbelievable. But it was a death sentence. And as the time passed by, I remember the day I got the call from his sister, Mike, Cliff is dying. Cliff is dying. And I waited for the confirmation. I had meant to talk to him just a couple weeks before that, and I didn't. But as he was laying there, now blinded by the disease, his organs shutting down, his pastor leaned into him and whispered in his ear, "How you doing, Cliff?" And Cliff's response was, "About 60%. And those were actually among the last words he ever spoke. That's the epitome of someone who understands what it is to live until you die. I don't know where you are today. I know that the comfort zone's easy to fall in, and I know that the circumstances get really, really heavy. And I know it's possible I might fail at something. But the reality is, if you allow him, I believe that God, no matter where you are, just might have another city for you to conquer too.